man. How have you been? It's been a minute since we've seen each other. I think I last saw you like 2016 for your first run.
Yeah, I know. So I think last time we said something like this was like at Bridgetown DIY.
Yeah.
So,
in La Puente.
A nice little shout out to Bridgetown DIY.
Yeah. Rest
cool
in
spot.
peace.
R.I.P. But yeah, it's been like a long time. And then it kind of hit that like, it's been almost 10 years since the first time I ran. So
yeah,
time flies.
That's crazy. Yeah, I didn't even think about it in those terms. Yeah, like it's been 8 years. Yeah. So, okay. So before we get into, obviously we want to get to know like your journey as being the mayor of our hometown. Before we get into that, like, let's start like we're all from Baldwin Park. We grew up there.
We were all in the Baldwin Park Braves Entertainment Corps.
Yeah, Braves Entertainment Corps. I forgot that's what it was called.
Right.
We just called it band. Yeah, I think they had to call it Entertainment Corps for tax purposes.
Oh, I don't know, but hey, I sold my fair share of chocolates to be there.
Hell so. Yeah. Yeah, you used to play trombone.
I did. I played saxophone my first year, and then I swapped over to trombone.
Nice. Do you play at like public events at all? Do you still play at all?
I play very little. I was playing when I was in my teens. I was playing at a nightclub, and then every now and then I'll do gigs now, like at parties, and then actually at our downtown street market, if we have like a cumbia band, like a band that plays cumbias or something, then I'll jump on stage and I'll play a song with them.
Damn, that's fun. Hell yeah. So I kind of want to know a little bit about how did you get started? Like, I feel like since knowing you, we went to high school together. We were both in band, but we kind of like we didn't like mix circles. Like we didn't really start talking until after we both got graduated and like we're getting involved in like local activities, politics and stuff like that. Where did your interest in politics start?
Oh, that's a good question. I always try to think back, like, how did I become so politically inclined? And, I always try to kind of like go back and think about it. And, I really think about it. And I think I was just always politically kind of inclined, right? I think like little by little, I kind of start putting pieces together and I think about it like, oh, I used to listen to punk music. That's like the most political music you can listen to, right? Mm-hmm. And I go back and I look at the lyrics and I read them, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is pretty political. And I remember I was like, I was all into like paying attention to like Amnesty International in high school, and like Greenpeace and things like that. So I guess I was just always politically inclined somehow. Just like, I guess it just kind of became like a catalyst, right? Like kind of everything just kind of summed up, and then I was like, oh, we should be paying attention to local stuff. Right.
Well, I think, the two things kind of go hand in hand because like I'm the same with like politics and like activism and stuff, or just like I wouldn't call myself an activist, but like just my community participation, I would say, especially like around 2016 when we first started talking, because, that was when Donald Trump started running for president and like politics started to make this noticeable shift into like, I guess like the disparities between like ideologies started to grow a lot more, and there was a bigger need for community-based organizing and participation. I was also into punk music, and like looking back on it now, like I've recently started to like get back into like listening to old music that I used to, and like stuff like the Subhumans and the Clash, and like even this band, one of my favorite bands, The Unseen, is very politically driven and like from an American point of view. And yeah, it's always like, oh, this stuff has always been there. Even like, did you ever go to punk shows like back when you were a kid?
I think I went to like a couple. I didn't have a lot of like punk friends, but yeah, I went to a couple of shows. I think, and then I did listen to some local stuff. I think like one of the most political songs I remember is like, I keep saying like. It's not good, but
it's a LA thing. We're gonna do an episode on that. We're talking about it because yeah.
I know it's funny because when other people do it, I correct them. Right? I'm like, hey, can you stop saying that?
That's funny.
But I don't know if you ever watched that movie, What's Up Rockers? Kind of like a low budget movie about skaters in like South Central.
Yeah, right?
And then there was the soundtrack had Moral Decay on it, and they had that one song, Política Corrupta, and I was like, oh, yeah. So it's like one of the main songs that I'm like, yeah, I did listen to very political music when I was younger.
Yeah, so. It's always present. I think that's what definitely motivated me, or just like I wouldn't even it indirectly motivated. It just plants that seed in your head to just like be. Punk music is very politically driven. It's very underdog driven. So it's all about like being part of your community and looking out for each other. And I think it just like planted that seed in my head for like stuff that I would do and be interested in as an adult.
Yeah, I think that's how it happens, right? A lot of the times we just kind of things kind of just get ingrained, or like little by little we kind of gets to us, and then we end up finally pay more attention to it.
Yeah.
We realize like, oh, that's kind of been here the whole time.
So you're a mayor of your hometown right now, right? And I mean, I don't know what it is like for other people or like for other mayors, but I would imagine, I would imagine that, you know, there's plenty of towns or cities where the mayor is somebody that's moved into the community and maybe is doing it for a job or for, you know, a long-term career or something like that. But you very specifically sought out to become the mayor of your hometown, Baldwin Park. Like, what was your experience growing up in Baldwin Park? Like, why do you feel tied to the community?
Yeah, well, you know, I got to Baldwin Park at a very young age. I went to Central Elementary. I went to Jones, and then for a little bit, and then I went to Santa Fe. I went to Baldwin Park High School, and I went to Sierra Vista, and then I even went to the automotive program in BPay. So I've really been kind of a product of Baldwin Park, and that's what I try to explain to people. I think it was just growing up in Baldwin Park, and so a lot of things that were going on in Baldwin Park. Like one of the biggest ones was, you know, I always tell everybody I was raised by an immigrant mother, and one of the biggest things that really took a toll on not just us, but a lot of the families in the community was like when undocumented drivers were being targeted. Right? A lot of these undocumented drivers, they're driving 20 to 30-year-old cars. They're going to have a 30-day hold on their car. You know, a lot of these people, they don't work in the area. They have to drive out.
Right.
So it hindered a lot of these people, you know, and so I think that's the main thing that made me pay attention to local politics. And then from there, just do more. But it's kind of like a catch-22. I know there is a lot of people that move into cities, or they move into districts, or they move into certain areas to be able to run. But I've also always said, just because somebody has lived here for a very long time doesn't mean that they are going to have the passion to make the changes or the necessary changes, or even have the ability to empathize with other portions of the demographics in that city. Right. And I think we fail to realize that sometimes. You know, I'm not going to lie. Sometimes I see Latino electeds, and they love to quote like Latino champions and talk about how proud they are, where they come from, and yada, yada, yada. And then I kind of look around. I'm like, well, you're not really helping the people you're talking about.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely felt that. Like, just brief history for people that don't know. I know we're kind of jumping around, but like, I had reached out to you. It was in 2016, right? When we had first started talking, was because that's when I started doing stand up, and I was involved at a place in La Puente called Bridgetown DIY, which at the time is just like a local DIY spot that was like communist run and very like or socialist run. I don't know, but it was very like you voted in everything, and everything had to get approved. And like, even like, I don't know if you knew this at the time, but like I had to get approval for you to come and speak at it, because it was like, because you were at the time running for public office. So it's like, that's how like involved like they were, and like how conscious and protective they were of that space. So like, and the space itself was mainly for like, you know, punk bands and like hardcore emo. Like there was a lot of different little scenes that used to pop up there, that it's interesting because they never really like, there's no Venn diagram of like, it was just like weird artistic indie scene, hardcore scene, rappers, and like they all got just kind of used this space and never really crossed paths. But I started doing stand up and like doing comedy shows there. But anyway, one of the biggest things was like, I started noticing this in high school. You know, you start to notice gentrification, right? And I think a lot of people have this idea of gentrification as being like rich people moving into communities and like fucking up the housing market. But what we were seeing was what felt like the current mayor, or the mayor at the time, was like selling the town to the highest bidder.
Yeah, and I think what happens is that, and I talk about this a lot, especially with like homelessness. I know that, I mean, I would hope that everybody knows that, Baldwin Park is doing a lot for homeless people and providing resources and also providing economic safety nets so that we don't have to get people to homelessness before we help them.
Right.
And a lot of the times what happens is that it's easy to say, well, look, we developed, right? Hey, we had this many people living in poverty, and we had this many people, maybe going hungry or being low income. Look, we don't have that anymore. But it's not because you solved it. It's not because you made it better for them. It's because you displaced them,
right?
And you moved them out, right? And so,
right.
Yeah, that's one way to change the statistics, but it's not the right way to do it.
Yeah,
right?
It's like if all you care about is the number, then you can just move the problem somewhere else.
Yeah, and that's what happens a lot of the times. And so, but that's not the way we should be doing it. A lot of the times what's going to happen is that a lot of these cities are going to lose their identity. If the people that make Baldwin Park are no longer able to live in Baldwin Park is not going to be Baldwin Park anymore. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing that we try to talk about. These people live here, they make the identity. They're the reason Baldwin Park is Baldwin Park. We have to make sure that they are stable here. One of the biggest issues is that a lot of the times we tend to try to vote for people that look like us, right? We think that identity politics are going to somehow make sense or get us to where we need to be. And it's not the case. A lot of people, like I said, right? A lot of people, they love to talk about these, like they love to champion certain events or things, but when it comes to doing the action, they're not going to do it.
Right.
And so it's not about identity politics. It's about your socioeconomic status. There could be somebody that looks just like me, that's much better off than me, might not have the ability to empathize or honestly just not care about the struggles that I'm going through as working class.
Right.
They're not gonna listen to me, or they're not gonna focus on that. They're gonna focus on something else, right?
Yeah, so. I remember the mayor before you was Mayor Lozano, who was mayor for pretty much all of our adult life, or like most of our lives up until that point. I know that he was mayor when my mom was a kid, and then he left for a while and then came back. But he was there for like 20 years. Like he had a 20-year run. Yeah. Before and
so I think it was a pretty big deal to be able to unseat like the longest serving mayor, especially as somebody who was never really in politics.
Right.
But I think it really comes to show, right, that we have to be involved and we have to have these discussions and change is possible, right? Regardless of how you feel about any elected, if you want to do something or you have to say something, you can get involved. Like we cannot wait on electeds to do what we need them to do, because sometimes it's honestly just not going to happen. So yes, these seats belong to everybody, right? And that's one of the things that I've tried to really ingrain in the community and try to educate them, or I try to be very informational as to why we do things or why we do what we do. One of my rules has always been, I never make a decision or vote for something that I cannot defend.
Right. So was there, because to overthrow, but to unseat Mayor Lozano. Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. But, to run against Mayor Lozano was a huge effort. The first time around, it didn't pan out. You had to run twice, correct?
Yeah, it was cool. It's been a journey to get to here, right? And so it's funny, right? Because I think a lot of the times when I ran the first time, people would ask me like, "You're gonna win?" I was like, "No, there's no way. It just mathematically doesn't pan out, right?" There's 3 people in the race. I was like nobody knew who I was, but it was a yeah, I didn't win the race, but it was a big win. When I ran the first time, I didn't have any money. I think I had like $4,000 in my savings. I used my savings, and elections get expensive. And at that time, there was no campaign contribution limits, so I was going against tens of thousands of dollars, right, from the other candidates. But it was always finding a way. So hey, I know I can't win this election, but what's the goal? Well, the goal is to change the way local elections go, right? It's not about voting for who I've known the longest or who's been here the longest or who I grew up with. It shouldn't be a popularity contest. It should be more about what we're talking about and understanding that the change we want to see happens right here. It's really thinking locally. are acting locally as well. A lot of the times we pay attention to the state, we pay attention to Congress, the president, but all these are very macro government level positions. And by the time, so the real effect that you'll feel comes from your city council, because your city council is the one deciding where housing can be built, what kind of housing is going to come in, things like that, right? What kind of services or resources are going to be available to families and communities. So yeah, you need to pay more attention to the micro level. And so that's kind of what we try to push, right? Like anything that you're interested in, your city council or your local electeds have the possibility to address, whether it's global warming or climate change or rising heat temperatures or poverty or the ability to have generational wealth. All that within that spectrum and beyond is addressed at the local level.
Right. I think some of the biggest corruption happens at the local level. Like you hear all these stories. I mean, just before I started learning about like the weird stuff going on with Baldwin Park, you know, a lot of people think of small towns as just like sleepy towns where everything kind of just runs smoothly. But like, I remember one of the biggest things why I started to get involved into politics was because I remember just being in high school and like being frustrated because the student body, like we were all like, yo, we need better facilities. We need better books. Like we're not getting, for it to come from the students to be like, we're not getting the education that we want. I remember there was a big thing where like the school had bought, or like one day we went into the cafeteria and there was like 4 big ass like big screen TVs for like the menu, for the cafeteria menu, and everybody was pissed. They were like, why do we have TVs that are just being used for menus in the cafeteria? Like what purpose does that serve? And they tried to tell us that it was like, they were like, oh, it was for a grant specifically to be spent on those things. So like, that's why. But it was just like, everybody was just frustrated. And I had just looked into like the Baldwin Park school district. And I forgot what year it was, but it was super recent where it had come out that like the board had misspent like upward, like around $2 million, so like that was meant for the school district. Like they were just mismanaging the money, and like there was money that went missing. They don't know who it went to, what it went towards, and it was just like, so to think about like the corruption. Josh, can you actually look this up? There's a book, I think by Congressperson Stacey Abrams, is that her name? She wrote a book that is about small towns and about how like pervasive corruption is in small towns, and like how like local sheriff's departments and like local mayors are getting away with like, you know, stealing like millions of dollars, you know, billions when you accumulate it across the nation.
Yeah, I don't know about the about that specific instance. I will say that it does get a little complicated sometimes, because sometimes we do have money for certain things. And then, you know, I know we get residents that will say, well, why don't you spend it on something else? Or why don't you spend it on this? Or why don't you spend it on that?
Right.
Well, sometimes grants are very specific as to what we can spend it on. And sometimes they're very, very even specific, beyond specific, right? So sometimes you can have a grant that says like, hey, you need to spend this on, you know, this area of well-being, right, or this type of project. And sometimes it's project specific. So you have to spend it on this project that you applied it for. It just depends on the grant and where the money comes from. I do think that people need to pay more attention to their definitely need to pay more attention to their city councils and how money gets spent. You know, I know that at least us and here in the city, we've pushed for transparency, and that's because, right, you know, the council has also been willing to push for that type of transparency. So like campaign contributions are limited. If you're a city contractor, you cannot contribute to our campaigns directly. And then you have term limits now, so you can't be there for more than 12 years. And the mayor title is going away. So this is actually my last year as an elected mayor.
Oh, wow. Wait, so did your office like were you behind those?
Some of the other council members took initiative on a lot of those. I did support the idea of getting rid of the elected mayor. I think it doesn't make any sense, and it kind of adds to the misconception of how local government works. So I know that when we think of a mayor, we think of kind of like the person running the day-to-day operations, and that's not really how it works. So I know, like in city of LA or New York or those major cities, yes, that's how it runs. But in smaller cities, we have something called a council manager system, where we have a city manager, and the city manager is practically the CEO. So he's the one running the day-to-day operations.
Okay.
And the mayor and the council are more of a board, right? So we show up to the council meetings, we give direction, we vote on stuff, but we're not hands-on. So there are limits as to how involved you can be, right? And you're not supposed to be involved in the daily operations of the city. To me, this is really important because a lot of the times residents might reach out. They might be upset about something, right? And because I'm the mayor, they think that I did it. Like, hey, I didn't even vote on that, right? But it's also important because it goes back to that same thing where people have a notion that before you become mayor, you should become council member. And so, well, nobody wants to run for mayor, so the mayor kind of has a safe seat, and the only people that try to take him out are council members that are not up for re-election that year.
Oh.
Right? So it becomes like a safe seat for people that are already there. So it creates an illusion of change for once, because whoever has that seat was already on the council. The mayor doesn't have any executive power, so I don't have any executive power. I can't do anything without the council. The mayor role in general is more ceremonial. So I run the meeting, I chair the meeting, and I'm more of the figurehead of the city, right? So whenever you read a statement from on the newspaper or an article, you'll see that it's always coming from me. But other than that, it really is just there's really is no difference between the mayor and the city council. That's also one of the things that I try to push the first year that I ran, so that people can understand, like, the mayor's seat belongs to anybody and everybody in the community.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Would you say that's why there's a push for the removal of that title?
Yeah, so we put it on the ballot. So it was actually ballot. It was a ballot initiative in 2022. Right?
Okay.
Right, we're in 2024.
Yeah.
So there was a couple of ballot measures. So there was the ballot measure for term limits. There's a ballot for campaign finance, and then there was the ballot measure for rotational mayor. So we'll rotate the mayor title, and I think that's beneficial for everybody because, like I said, right, a lot of times people pay attention to the mayor, and a lot of times they don't focus on the council. And so this way, I think it puts a little bit more attention on everybody, and we hold everybody accountable, whether you're mayor or you're council, which at the end of the day, you're still all part of the same body. So we want to make sure that we're just creating kind of that visibility for everybody.
Right. Yeah. Touching back on like what we were talking about with the grants stuff, because I understand, like, sometimes grants are very specific. I think the frustration, at least at the time, was that, like, why are we getting grants for this? It seems like there was at the time that there was an effort to put lipstick on a car dent. Like you're not really solving. It's like, I guess the idea was like I said, we don't need this. Like, if the grant was specific for this, we don't need the grant. We need other stuff. So, but I understand that, like, there are things that are very specific, and there's a lot of, I guess, when you're on this side of the pulpit, you have an idea of like what needs to get done, and you don't necessarily know all the things of like how things actually operate. So, you were elected when you were 26, correct?
I was 26.
Yeah. And, I remember, you, when you were campaigning, and like even just like your social media presence of being very like passionate and very like,
I like that, passionate.
Yeah. very direct. I mean, there's some stuff I want to get into about like the stuff that went on while you were running, especially the first time. But I know that there was like 2 controversies that happened while you were not on you, but with the opposing campaign. But just like, what are some of the things, or like, how was the transition of like, now you're a mayor, now you're in office, like, you're like, I want to do this, but I can't, or like, you know what I mean? Like Mr. Smith goes to.
That's funny. It's funny because I always think about that. So I think a lot of people, I mean, you've seen that I'm like very active on social media, and a lot of times I'm just, people like to troll, and I just like to kind of troll back. I mean,
right.
Look, if you're gonna dish it, you gotta be able to take it, right?
Right.
But also I'm active on social media because it's a communication tool, and people have questions, and I'm able to answer them, right? And I'm able to kind of build that rapport with a lot of the community members. Yeah, and I also like to sometimes I like to just be funny.
Yeah.
There's this, and it kind of goes back to the same thing. It's for some reason, when it comes to electeds, we're so stuck on image. It's got to be image. This guy's polished, wearing a suit all the time, but none of that translates into your well-being. Why are we constantly putting this at? Yes, I'm an elected, but I'm also a human being, right? And and being in politics is always a catch-22, right? If I'm too serious, then this guy's letting the position get to his head. Emmanuel's changing,
right?
But then if I'm still myself, this guy's immature, right? So it's like, we sometimes are not paying attention to the things that matter, but being on social media, it's also important because that's it's actually the place where a lot of misinformation starts, right? And at the end of the day, government is politics, and there's always people that are going to try to, misconstrue facts, or they're going to try to misconstrue information. They're going to try to make you look bad, or they're going to try to just spread rumors or just spread misinformation. And so if I'm on social media and I at least make a statement before it kind of spreads too much, then I've kind of helped mitigate that, right? But I think that it also shows the community that, hey, I'm willing to speak up on what we're doing, and it goes back to that same thing, right? I never make a decision that I can't defend.
Was there any instances where do you have any examples come to mind of like when you had to or when you just chose to go and say something publicly on social media?
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, I mean, with any project that we build, tiny homes right. was a big one. When we built the tiny homes, everybody, and they still do, right? That supposedly we're gonna decrease property values, and we're gonna do all this stuff, and it's gonna become, kind of a, free for all, which hasn't been the case. Our tiny homes have had 0 calls for services, and they actually house a majority of seniors. So these types of programs are safety economic nets, but they also prevent people from ending up on the street, and they help them get the resources they need, right? But it also gives us insight and data into what we need to be working on, right? And it goes back to housing. So, if, a lot of people aren't paying attention to it. They just want to build nice, or they want to build expensive so that they get more property tax and they get more revenue into the city budget. But there's decisions that we have to make, and they have to be evidence-based, right? So if I'm looking at who's on the verge of poverty, or who's on the verge of homelessness, and who's on the verge of, just economic struggle, then I'm looking at the data and I know what I need to act on, right? And that's kind of what we're doing. We have to be that way. We have to really take a public health approach to the things that we do, right? And so when I look at the tiny homes, I know that, hey, we probably need more senior services, or we probably need to do this, and we advocate for that, and we make it happen.
I think that's an interesting aspect, because I do remember, I think the first time we met after high school was when me and Dominic were doing Friends with Benefits.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about.
Can you just clarify that that's like the name of your podcast or something?
Yeah, we had a show called Friends with Benefits.
It was supposed to be
actually,
like local comics, and each show was a charity fund.
Yeah. And so at one of the, actually, what's funny is that we just threw Friends with Benefits out there, but you weren't actually part of Friends with Benefits. You were part of a different thing that I used to do there called Cabaretera, which was something that I did with a friend named John Sanchez, who was before I started doing any of this podcasting stuff, I used to host live events that was all Latino performers, and it was a variety show. And so for one of the shows, as part of it, we had Emmanuel come in and gave him a chance to speak. And it was actually one of the first times you actually gave you didn't stump, but you came in and took community questions, and it was almost like an opportunity for you to come and practice before you got into actually campaigning, because you couldn't campaign officially, right? Or something like that.
Yeah, so it was kind of I think it was at the beginning of the campaign, so I probably hadn't set up all my paperwork yet, but yeah. Yeah, I remember that. It was funny. So I always think back to that day, right? And I'm like, oh, that was kind of interesting. people are like performing, they're doing all this other stuff, and then I come in, I'm like, yeah, let's get like political.
Yeah.
So the reason that I was bringing that
Yeah.
up was hearing you speak now and hearing you speak then. Something that I remember that seems to correlate was you were talking about a similar idea where a lot of it is starting with quality of life and housing for the residents and how that reflected and impacted the city overall. Like, because this is something that I was invested in when I was like still in like my mid 20s, because a statistic I found out was like the majority of people that suffer from homelessness are either the elderly or the disabled, mentally handicapped, and it's a connected thing where like it's not just fixing housing, it's like fixing the community and the community resources. Like when I heard about tiny homes, I thought it was a great idea, and it reminded me of someone's tried to do in Pasadena where they were building portable, easy setup like instant houses. And there's this weird like advanced version of it on Amazon now that I think someone stole his idea, but it was a thing like he could build a functioning like home with like running water and a bed and an outlet, and it would take like 2 days and that person could move it if they had to, but the city wasn't okay with it because he was just doing it on his own. And so they someone called the cops on him and they told him to stop. He wasn't allowed to do it anymore. But the main thing I'm bringing up is like that was something you were saying way back then, where when we start to focus on one thing, we can see how it's all connected and how like you were just saying, like where can it improve and how can it improve?
Yeah, and I mean, by all means, there's so many things that we have to provide for residents, and it's a generational thing, right? We have to get to the next generation before they end up in a certain cycle of life, right? And a lot of times, what I try to convey to people, and I mean, this is full on like public health. It's your detriments of social health and health in general. And so your zip code dictates, it dictates how long you're going to live. It dictates how healthy you're going to be, the access of healthcare you're going to have. And that makes sense, right? If you live in a rich area, it means you probably have more resources. If you live in a working class area, it means you have less resources. And so we want to create, at least to me, it's important that we create a minimum standard of living for people, or that they know that, hey, if they, hit an economic struggle or they enter some sort of crisis, that they have the resources for that. And these are not conversations that are easy. I understand that. And I think a lot of the times that's why we don't see electeds having them, because they don't want to have those hard conversations. They don't want to deal with that stuff.
Right.
It creates tension, or not tension. It could create tension, but sometimes it just creates a difficulty that they'd rather not deal with. Right. And I think that's that's another problem. A lot of electeds, they like to, in general, and I say this as someone who is in the circle, they tend to base their tenure off of how long they've served rather than what they've done when they've served, right? It's
Right.
always about the next reelection, or it's always about the next step. But I always think about that too. The way I see it is, well, what's the point of me being here if I'm not going to get things done, right? And so to me, that's always kind of been something that I pride myself on, right? And you look back and we've gotten so much done in the last couple of years, right? Whether it's our affordable home ownership program or our services for affordable home repair, which is another important thing. Providing food baskets for residents for the past 4 years during the pandemic time. Things like that. Like, oh, but maybe these are things that wouldn't have happened if I wasn't here, right? And that sounds a little... It kind of sounds like a little like Messiah complexy, which is not what I'm trying to convey. But what I'm trying to say is, like, all of us have that opportunity, right? And it doesn't have to just be in politics. Just in any other field that we work in. Well, what difference am I making by being here, right? And I know that if somebody else was here, they probably wouldn't do that, or they probably wouldn't advocate for that, right? And so it just kind of speaks to our ability to make changes. And I always think about this when we always had like school speakers, or we had like people like that would come into classes and speak, and then always tell you like, oh, you can do anything you want. And I was like, oh, this is really cheesy. Like, and now I'm kind of like that person. Now I'm kind of like being the person that goes and tells people that. But yeah, I mean, it's true, right? We really have to be motivated, and we have to really sometimes just be a little bit naive as to how far we can get, and really push for our own story, our own narrative. If I sat here and I listened to everybody else around me, I would have never been mayor. I would have probably never even made it to council, because times change, right? And everybody's opportunities at a different time, and that's what I try to explain to people. When I was running for mayor, I think there was like all sorts of things being thrown at me, like, oh, this guy not a homeowner, this guy doesn't have a degree, et cetera, et cetera. Well, for one, I'm not a homeowner because there's a housing crisis. Are we tone deaf to the current situation? And yeah, I didn't have a degree. I went to trade school. But then again, it goes back to the same thing. A lot of people are polished. A lot of people have a degree. Doesn't mean anything. None of that correlates or translates into you being well represented, right? And so, but I do have my degree now, and I've started working on my master's. But it's just interesting, right? How politics is a very, very ugly place, but it's also, unfortunately, like the one place where you get the ability to do a lot of things.
Yeah, I want to talk about that, because I don't know if you're aware. You came up in conversation in one of our previous episodes a while back.
I must have missed it.
Right. But Mario Rodriguez was on, and who we all went to school with too. And we kind of talked a little bit about you and like your journey of being a mayor, and it kind of plays into this, what you're talking about, like having to participate in politics. Right. And in that episode, Mario is, the way that Mario talks is he's like, I don't want to see you in fucking posting pictures on social media. Just like do the work. Like I shouldn't be seeing you, which I didn't, because of the way the conversation went during that episode. I didn't really get to like, you kind of already like touched on that, of just like you're trying to be transparent, and like you're trying to be a part of the community as much as you are trying to be the mayor and like get stuff done. And actually, one thing that I wanted to say, because he was like, I don't care if you're taking a picture in front of a restaurant, and I was like, I actually like that, because it's like, dog, you're from this town, and like that's like a town like staple of Baldwin Park.
Yeah. So I will say, very active on social media, and I interact with a lot of people. Some people like it, some people don't.
Yeah.
With the pictures, when electeds post on social media, so I think for the most part, every now and then I'll acknowledge like our proclamations, and I'll acknowledge our like our special events or ceremonial stuff. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, I always try to like post like the things that were getting done, right? Mm-hmm. And it's important because it goes back to the same thing. If I'm not involved in these communication circles, other people are, right? And they're gonna say something different about it. So at the very least, I need you to see my perspective, and I'll answer your questions. I think I answer a lot of questions on social media, but also it goes back to the same thing, right? If I do something, I'm going to defend it. And so with projects, I want people to see, hey, look, we got this done. The things that we think about, the solutions that we're talking about and how to get things going, they're possible. They're absolutely possible, and we're getting them done. Yeah, every now and then I think fun pictures are there. With the restaurants, we want to make sure we support them and show them support and showcase them so that people are aware of them. But I understand that there's also a point where I try not to post too much, but I understand that sometimes electeds can post a little too much.
And it's like, what are you doing? Like, you're always on.
What's this got to do with this? But then again, at the end of the day, electeds are also human. So, I mean, just it's at the end of the day, it's a communication tool, right?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I like when I see you post. I mean, it's like local government type of posting. Like you're posting community places, and like for me, I don't live in Baldwin Park anymore, but especially like when you first, like when the transition was made and you like were official, I had personally had a feeling of like Lozano was like selling out the community. Like there's this big perception that like big business is good for small towns. So a lot of our local restaurants, a lot of our local shops, even like entire living areas are being torn down or sold out, and like big block like chains are coming in, and there's a lot of stuff that even carried over into because of contracts and stuff like that. Stuff that was all carried over that we saw popping up over the last few years.
Yeah, I know. Like a lot of the times, people always, and I understand that we want amenities. We want to be able to go out. You know, I know people say like, "Oh, can we get a movie theater? Can we get a bowling alley? Can we get this?" I'm like, "Oh, it doesn't really work that way. It's not Sim City. I can't kind of drag stuff around, right?" But there's ways to encourage people to develop a certain way, or even support the businesses so that they don't go out. You know, anchor stores and certain retail stores and retail chains, they're good. They bring in, they're good to a certain extent. There's pros and cons to everything, right? And but most of the time, I want to try to support our local businesses, because then money stays local, right? When you, not only that, but then they're paying property tax. They're paying property tax. They're paying their business licenses, their taxes. They're really nurturing a local identity as well, right? Because it's not just about these amenities. You want to make sure that the city has a identity, right? Like when you go to other cities, their downtown looks a certain way. It's all uniform. It makes you want to be there, right? And that's one of the biggest things that we're also working on, like downtown, making it walkable, prioritizing the community and trying to provide that sort of entertainment for them and things to do in the city. Because I think a lot of times they feel that they have to leave. And so, well, no, that's not the case. We have some amenities, and we can always try to bring in more. So yeah, I mean, there's really, development is really, really important. It's critical because, and that's what I try to explain to people. Once we build something, it's not going away. It's not going away in my lifetime. It's probably not going away in, my kid's lifetime. It's going to be here for a couple generations. And so the opportunity to build something there is gone. So when you're developing, when you're trying to do things, you really have to think long-term, not just about what you're developing on that land, but hey, how does this create synergy, or how does this, what more development can this drive in the future?
All right.
I think that's what felt like people's problems with the decisions the previous administration were making, like coming up, because you would see like LA Fitness popped up, 24-hour Walmart popped up, and these like new shopping centers that were bigger than the ones that everyone was used to. And so on paper, it looks like our hometown is prospering. It's making money again. But then it would be like, you walk down Francisquito and none of the bushes have been trimmed in 5 years. The streets were dirty. The parts of the city were still struggling to find funding to it's like a similar thing with the grants, where it was like how it was allocated and what it was purpose for affected what got fixed when and where. And I actually think it was an interesting thing when you brought up the grants, because that was something that I was learning about after I graduated, partly from my own like personal interest in it, but partly also I knew people that were trying to run for the school board. It's something I've always been interested in because I have, neurodivergencies and disabilities, and I remember firsthand experiencing the sort of effect of that mentality. Like schools were trying to show that they were improving and functioning, and so they were sort of racing each other to do that. Like, because it was an interesting concept that I don't think a lot of people realized. Like, we would always, when I was in school, we would always talk about how like Baldwin Park was building this, but Sarah Vista High School was building that, and like it felt like they were competing, but nobody knew why. And then you grow up and you learn, it's like, well, because they literally are being made to. Like, if a grant is given to Baldwin Park, regardless of what it's for, that's a grant that was not given to Sarah Vista. Like they get an auto department, they get a science department, we get new vending machines, they get new fountains. And I think it's a similar concept of like just the idea of getting more was better than the idea of getting nothing. And so that for me was like, that's my personal like theory of why it always felt like we were just updating things for the sake of updating things and not paying attention to like where or why.
Well, I actually did a 2-year program at the automotive services for adult school.
Right.
So I really don't know too much about the school district. There's a whole different governing board. We get along now, so it's really important to mention that. Kudos to them. We're getting stuff done together. I can't really say anything about that. But what I would say is that normally what happens is that if the land behind the high school is already being used for certain functions and they have the space for it, then they're going to try to capitalize on that for that specific grant. And so we know that a lot of that land gets used for adult school programs.
Right.
And so then it adds that benefit to Baldwin Park High School because they're right next to it, where they can create that ROP program, I think is
right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there's sometimes and that's sometimes that something, in general, that sometimes happens in government where we kind of see something or like, well, but then that's why it's also important to be involved, so we can say, oh, I understand that it looks like this, but what's happening is this, things like that. But we've actually been, and so as mayor, I'm not going to say that I was like a go-getter in high school, right? I really just wanted to graduate and kind of move on. Sometimes it's a little crazy to think that we're pushing 16-year-olds or 17-year-olds to figure out their life right then and there, right? And as I've gotten older, I've gotten more opportunities, and I've been able to kind of find like a field that I feel comfortable in and do things. And so these are fields that I wasn't aware of when I was graduating high school, right? Because the mayor does have a full-time job beyond being mayor. So we actually work with them to make sure that kids get more opportunities. So I don't know if you're aware, but we gave them $120,000 from our ARPA funding, so that they could provide excursions for youth. But one of the things that I asked for was that when you select a youth, you cannot base it on their GPA, right? And a lot of these kids, and I kind of think of it in myself too, right? Sometimes kids they're still developing. They might not be doesn't mean that because they're not doing their best now, they're going to do their best later, right? But if you treat them that way, even if it's not intentional, you're kind of setting them up for a path, right? And so we want to make sure that we provide opportunities for everybody, whether they're going to an Ivy League school or they have a 4.0 or they're kind of navigating. Everybody's on a different timeline,
right?
And I try to advocate for that. It's really important for me because this is the foundation they're developing, and if we provide them with the proper opportunities, then they can know that there's more to life than what they know now, right? Or they can know that, hey, in the future I can do this or I can do that. So that's some of the things that we also try to do with them.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I definitely relate and appreciate that as well, because I remember when I was in high school, like I was a student of means, like not of me, like I was capable of getting higher grades, but I was like, this is all a scam. I'm like, fuck this. And like, I just like I wasn't properly motivated because I didn't like how the school was being run. And like, it's taken me this time to like figure myself out too. And like,
it was all that punk music you were listening to.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so it's cool. Especially like as you get older, you see how important it is and you want better for the next generation. Like I think, as humans, we understand how hard it is to like grow up and to have to learn all kinds of stuff, and like how hard it is to have everything figured out by the time you graduate from high school.
Yeah, I think sometimes we set these unrealistic expectations, and then in turn we kind of internalize them, right? I'm like, oh, I'm 21, I should be set. No, there's no way.
Yeah.
But also, just. Yeah, a lot of the problem is that I think a lot of the times and it's not just in Baldwin Park. It seems like I think this is just a general thing for like teenagers to hate where they come from.
Yeah,
right? And they're always talking about like, oh, I'm gonna get set and I'm gonna move out, right? And that sort of thinking it's kind of very individualistic, right? And just in general, a lot of our culture is individualistic sometimes, and so we kind of have to get away from that because we kind of think individually, but we're all very interconnected, just the way all of our systems work. So if my neighbor's not doing good, of course it affects me, right? It
Right.
affects me because my city doesn't have it means that for one, the resources aren't available for them. And then two, it means that they're on a cycle of just a cycle of deteriorating health, right? And so, yeah, that affects me because they're part of my community, right? Our kids are going to grow up together. That's my neighbor. We want to make sure that we have a strong sense of community to make sure that, that we're all taking care of each other. And at the end of the day, it really does benefit us to make sure that we are thinking of those issues, whether they directly affect us or not.
Right. Do you have something?
No, I was gonna say I really like that because I do remember like when I was little, there was a lot more of that. I think there was a lot of push for people to, and not just like for prosperity's sake, like not just like community, like I'd see community events, but also just everyone knew each other. And then that transitional stage between, like for me, it was like between when I was exiting elementary school and when I was entering high school, where you see all these new things popping up and these new things happen to replace like neighborhoods and people's homes. And I remember less and less of that stuff was happening to the point where like, not only was it like coming from the city, but it was coming from the people that like, if they weren't interested, it just stopped happening. Like I remember there used to be a community garden that closed down.
Yeah, I think that one's run by. I think that's run by like a separate organization, but I think it's made a comeback.
Oh, and what I'm saying is like it was a combination of like what the city was capable of doing, but also like how much they were able to kind of rally the people of the city in order to. I can't think of the word, but in order to like instigate change.
Yeah. And things like that they're also important because they build that sense of community. Right?
Yeah.
And you don't want your neighbors not knowing each other. Knowing your neighbors and getting along with them is also important.
Yeah, because I remember when a few years after I moved away from Baldwin Park, maybe when I was 21, and like a year later, I don't know how. Sorry, I forget how much older are you?
Well, I actually just turned 30, so.
Right. So I think this would have been before you were officially in office.
Yeah, probably.
But I remember that, like, and not to say that this was like the old administration's fault, but I was on like TikTok and then eventually I was on Vine, and I noticed that a lot of people that from LA were moving to Baldwin Park because it was cheaper, because these new developers were coming up and they were buying these new properties. Or people were moving out and then like property managers were buying up the properties to flip the houses. I remember there was like a lot of influencers moving in, and that was a weird thing for me because I was like a fan of these people, but I was also like watching them kind of play in my hometown but not know anything about it, and then like say stuff about it. It was a weird concept. Like I used to make this joke that like it felt like Baldwin Park was turning into a sort of rest stop on the freeway. Like people would come in to interact with the businesses and then leave. Like everyone knows where In and Out number 1 is, but nobody knew what like the history of it being, originating in Baldwin Park and like the city around it existed. They just knew that that's where it was.
Yeah, and so that's kind of what's happening in general with housing. I mean, housing is very, very talk about housing a lot because it's very important, right? It's like the foundation to pretty much your life.
Right.
If you're struggling to pay rent, that means you have no money to get healthcare or see a doctor. You have no money to eat healthy. You have no money to go out. You're really just in the cycle where it's just work, sleep, right? And it also affects families. I remember when I first started getting involved in like hands-on and organizing, I did a lot of stuff in LA. And yeah, it wasn't Baldwin Park, but I think it gave me insight as to what's coming, right? Because there is kind of a domino effect. People can't afford to live in LA, so they move into the San Gabriel Valley.
Yeah.
The people in the San Gabriel Valley can't afford to live in the San Gabriel Valley, so they end up moving to San Bernardino County or Riverside County, et cetera, et cetera. So there's this domino effect. But it also talks to kind of the irony where, it just kind of shows where we haven't created enough safety nets, right? And I know like a lot of people are upset about school closures, which is like a hot topic.
Right.
And then they go and they get upset at like the school board, but the school board, they're in a tough place. They have to make sure that the school district as a whole keeps running and that it doesn't go into a deficit, right? And if they don't have the kids to keep these schools open, then they don't have a choice, right? But why did this all happen? It didn't happen because schools just decided to close. It's because people can't afford to have kids, and people who have kids can't afford to live here. And that kind of ties back into what I've been talking about with your public health, determinants of health, and creating that stability. But it's not the school board. The school board doesn't have any power in creating the type of housing that they needed for families to be housed in the area, right? But it's weird that nobody has really touched the topic of the city council's not creating the type of housing that they needed for their residents. So that's just a little bit of a interesting one. And then it kind of touches on the complexities of how different governing boards are sometimes without the power of things, and the reliance on one another, and how important it is to make sure that everybody's working together for a common cause.
Yeah, and hopefully the shift from like, removing the title of mayor and like creating it a more city planning, like I forgot the terms you used earlier, but like making it very apparent that like this is a large group of people that should be working together. Yeah. Different interdepartmental organization.
I mean, there's a lot of moving parts to local government, and it's very difficult. One of the things that I tell people sometimes is like, these positions are not designed for people like me. And so I actually work overnight. So I work overnight.
I know.
So I work overnight. So if you see me like online at night, it's because I'm awake.
Exactly. Whenever we've had to interface with each other, it's like 12 to 1 in the morning. And I'm like, I'm also working like editing and stuff. And this was like,
sometimes I get like an idea. I'm like, oh, we should do this. But I got to make sure that like whoever I'm going to text it to has like their do not disturb on or something. So I don't bother them. But yeah, so I work overnight. So if I have something to do in the morning, then I can take care of it in the morning. And if I have something to do in the afternoon, I can take care of it in the afternoon. But these positions are really designed for people that are like either well off or retired, right? And that's to me that's a problem, because these positions should be a little bit more available or open to anybody and everybody, which technically they are, right? You can run for most seats if you're over 18. But what happens is that as members of the city council, you need to divvy up these special district and regional agency seats. And you have to serve on them, and a lot of times that's where a lot of the money goes. Mm-hmm. So it gets very complex when we're talking about grants, when we're talking about funding, and when people are like, "Oh, where's the money? Where's the money?" Well, it's going to all these different places, and then it's also the people you're electing at your local level. You have to make sure that they have the values that you want, because not only are they representing you at the city level, they're representing you on all these other boards, and they're deciding where this money goes and how it gets spent. So, it's not just the city council meetings and the special events that are city focused, but it's also these other committees where you have to get involved.
Right. There's something, I know we're going to start rounding out the episode pretty soon, but there is one thing I did want to bring up before we ended, because it's something, one, I brought it up in the episode with Mario, and I wanted to give you a chance to address it.
Oh, no. It was a hot seat.
No, yeah, I didn't want... Listen, this isn't a gotcha moment. I understand you're a city official, But I did want to talk about this because it is something that I believe in, and it's just based off of, like, how I saw things leading up to this, right? Was, like, again, I talk about, like, who I saw you as when you were running and when you were campaigning. And also, before I know that I'm taking a long roundabout way to get to it, but
sounds like you're taking your time. How hard is this to say this?
No, I know. I get it. But it's because I want to preface this by saying, like, obviously from what I've seen, and I follow you on social media, and I'm a big fan of like the Tiny Homes Project. I'm a big fan of like, investing. You were telling me about, helping a private road get the improvements that it needs, and like figuring out how to get it happen. Like you're actually doing the work to improve the communities. It's something that you campaigned on 8 years ago, and are now like I see a lot of the follow through, which is something that's refreshing that we don't get a lot in government, right? However, this is just something I wanted to ask you about and to hear your perspective on it, which is involvement with the police department, right? Because, going back before, I'm very, reluctant to associate myself with the police and like my community. And there was a lot of controversy with the police department around the time. And I know you were very critical of the police department before moving in. And I made a comment in the other episode about, one of the first things I saw you post about was like you're posting pictures with the police department as the new mayor, right? So that in the moment when it happened,
Oh, you sure this is not a gotcha moment?
in the moment, it was something that like not hit me, like it wasn't a shell shocking moment, but it was just something that I was like, oh man, like what, I felt it rubbed me the wrong way, right? But I understand you're a public official and you're gonna have to be working with different parts of the city to function, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's funny because I've never really, I know like a lot of people bring that up. I don't really talk about it. Let's see. Let me figure out the political words for this.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. No, I've always been I've been critical of a lot of people, right? And it goes back to the same thing where I don't make decisions or I don't do something that I can't defend, and and even like with some of our PD officers, I've always, even with like our chief, we got to hire a chief, which was crazy. I was like 26 and I was able to swear in a chief of police, right? But I've always been open about how I felt and why I felt that way. And but to me, it's important that we have a good relationship, and I get along with a lot of them, and I think a lot of them are very good people, and a lot of them are actually local, right? And to me, it's important that they hear from me, right? Because otherwise it becomes whispers or things like that. So yeah, I have brought up like, hey, before I became mayor, these are the things that kind of upset me, right? And I always tell them, and yeah, I support our police department, but never blindly, right? And I expect them to behave in a certain manner with our community, and I expect them to, treat our community with respect. And we've had a good relationship, not just with PD, but all of our other departments, right? Because I think that we are on the right ship, and I think that a lot of our current officers understand that it's important to make sure that we have that communication. So it's important to make sure that we are changing things. That we always want to be understanding of the past and be critical, but we also want to make sure that we are pushing things for the better. And we've done that. And our PD was very supportive of like tiny homes. They also do a lot of training to make sure that they are understanding the complexities of homelessness and things like that. And but yeah, I mean, if somebody sends me a complaint about any staff member, or regardless of who it is, I always make sure that I follow up with it. So there's no free passes for anybody. But yeah, to me, it's important that we foster relationships and that we really push for that sort of communication and getting along. And yeah, I do get along with them, and I think at the end of the day, we get very passionate about police. I 100% understand that, but we cannot do the blanket statement thing, right? And a lot of the times we see that something happens in a certain area that we don't agree with, and then we tend to take it out on like a local department. Well, the guy that did that doesn't work here, right? So it's really about having these very important conversations. And even with I know that we hear a lot about like police budgets, and a lot of times what I've told people is, well, you're not comparing us in the proper way. So I know they say like, well, Baldwin Park spends 60-something% of its police budget of its budget on police, and this city spends only 40%. And so, yeah, it doesn't mean that it's aligned, right? Percentages are not. I'm trying to explain this right, but this is something that's really important. So it doesn't mean that we're overspending. It means that we have a smaller budget, right? So if you and I are if you're making $100,000 a year and I'm making $50,000 a year, and we're both paying $500 a month for health insurance, my percentage looks higher than yours, but we're still spending the same amount.
Right.
Right. That's kind of what I try to explain to people. But I understand that it's something that's very, very touchy subjects for a lot of people. I understand that. Like I said, I've always been very open with our staff about the things that I've been critical about and the things that I'd like to see, because I want to make sure that Baldwin Park isn't a place of tension, and it's not a place where people feel uncomfortable, and it's not a place where, you know, people feel that they are being targeted by their city. And so, you know, it's not like I've changed my ways, right? I hold everybody to a high standard, and as long as, you know, but it's also important to have that relationship with everybody.
Right. I guess hearing that, I do agree, or I do understand a lot of where you're coming from. I do see a lot of what you're saying, and I do see that in the way you navigate your position, right?
Yeah.
I guess for me, a sticking point, you know, that I would push back on a little bit is, you know, the percentages, right? So percentage, like, obviously I understand smaller budget, higher percentage, right? But to me, it would still, this being somebody from the outside is like, okay, well, why is the percentage even then? Why is the amount that high instead of like spending it in other areas?
So that's my favorite question. It's because Baldwin Park isn't as developed as other cities, right? And that's one of the reasons that we also push for development, so that we can make more money. So a lot of the times, you know, we make money based off sales tax, property taxes. You know, it's not like we're not a business. We're not selling you goods or things like that, right? So, we're working on developing our downtown. We want to make our downtown more walkable, more enjoyable. I mentioned that earlier. So if people enjoy their downtown, they're going to spend money here, right? And then the money stays local, and so we'll have a bigger budget. When our budget grows, then our percentage is going to go down. But I don't think it's a transparent way to compare people when we're comparing them based on percentages, because that kind of skews the reality of expenditures. But you know, if you compare our police department to any other, we're at about the right size. So what I mean is, you know, and I kind of talked about it earlier, right? People feel that they need to go out of the city to spend their money. Mm-hmm. So then all this money goes to all the areas around us. So they have a bigger budget. So that's why their percentage looks smaller, right? But it goes hand in hand with development. We need to develop our city so that we have a downtown that's enjoyable, that we have businesses that are thriving, so that people can spend money, so that not all their money is going to rent, so that they have that expendable cash, right? And it's not something that happens overnight, right? Development takes a long time. Planning takes a long time. But as long as we start setting the path, or we start setting kind of the stepping stones towards that, we're going to get there.
Okay.
So sometimes it's a game of patience.
Right. I get that too. Were you going to say something?
No, I was going to say, I think I understand, because it kind of seems to connect to, sorry, there's a hair in my mouth. It kind of seems to connect to what I was saying earlier about it's a combination of like the efforts of the local government, but also like how it interacts with the people, how the people interact with that government. Like, I wanted to ask how do you think that connects to like the fluctuation in I'm trying to figure out how to describe this. Like, the best way I can say is city funded recreational like programs. Like, I remember towards the end of my scholastic career, like when I was exiting high school, like people were hearing rumors that Morgan Park was going to shut down. And a lot of the old programs, like the Taekwondo program, that's a different private organ. The boxing program, a lot of the like, people were hearing that the summer school, what was it, like the summer camp that they did there was going to close. And then I graduate and I'm still living in Baldwin Park. And some of that stuff did in a form go away, but then they popped up like I remember seeing after a while the teen center started to like rebuild and that art center came up. The one that's like I think right next to the police station. Yeah. And that was the thing that I remember through that art center, a lot of the old programs that were no longer at Morgan Park came back because I was in some of those programs. One of them was there was like a introductory to comic book panel art that I took. I took when I was 9, and then I took the advanced version when I was in high school at the new art center. How do you think that connects?
So, yeah, I talked about this on the council as well. You know, when we had ARPA dollars, we spent a lot of money in.
Real quick, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you explain what ARPA is? This is my first time hearing.
ARPA is the ARPA is the I believe it's the American Rebuilding Plan.
Association.
Yeah, it was. I think so. There's so many acronyms.
I know.
It's kind of sometimes hard, but it was a federal money that was provided to cities and through the pandemic to kind of spend and spend on development or resources and services and things like that.
Kind of like the PPP loans, but for cities.
I think Josh Googled it.
Yeah, it's ARPA stands for the American Rescue Plan
There
Act.
you go.
It's a $1.9 trillion economic stimulus bill passed by U.S. Congress, signed into law by Joe Biden, March 2021. It's to speed up the recovery of economic and health effects of COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, cool. So the city got a good chunk of money, and we invested in a lot of things. And half of it went towards city infrastructure needs, and half of it went towards completely focused on community services and resources. So that's how we funded the food baskets on a monthly basis for the last 4 years. That's how we funded I believe we used a portion of that money to fund our affordable homeownership program in partnership with Habitat for Humanity. So this money kind of went to a lot of things. And one of the things that I've always talked about is, unfortunately, when a city hits an economic downturn, or, you know, the first thing to go is always going to be arts. It's always going to be anything that's recreational, right? And so we want to make sure that we protect those services. So we used ARPA to fund them, not only fund them, but also cut the cost for residents. At some point, they were free on a reimbursement basis. So we wanted to make sure that you would show up and actually use the service, and then we would reimburse you once you completed the program.
Yeah,
I think that's what was happening when I was in it.
So that's what normally what happens. So unfortunately, when there's an economic downturn, recreational services are going to be the first to go, right? And that's something that I've also advocated for. We want to make sure that, you know, people have access to daycare, people have access to services. You know, daycare is one of the most expensive services, and I can say that firsthand. I remember, you know, when my son was born, we were trying to find daycare, and I think just like part-time was as much as I'd make in a week, right? And I was working full-time, so it doesn't make, you know, somebody would have to stay home. But so services like that, like the after-school care program, I think we also have some before school, and all the other things like boxing, all these other services that we provide. We want to make sure that we stabilize them, but we also are always looking for partnerships, because with partners, you know, we're able to increase our ability to provide resources and services to the community, and sometimes it cuts our costs, or sometimes they have a grant that they can use to be in the community, so it really works out. But yeah, we're always cognizant of all these things, and that's important, right? Because it goes back to the zip code thing.
Right. That does remind me. It's a brief thing. What do you think of Happy Campers? Because
what is that?
It's a daycare.
It's one of the daycares. I think that it connects to the program because I think they wear the same shirts. It's, I don't know where in the city what would you say? It's not downtown.
It's no, it's near La Puente. It's off of Francisquito and it's on Big Dalton off of Francisquito.
Behind the AutoZone.
I mean, it's fine. I do want to touch on something, kind of touching back to.
Is this another hard question?
It's connected to the other hard question.
Okay.
No, it's just like, you know, over the years, and also I appreciate like you explaining, you know, the ARPA situation and everything that you've been facing, like with, you know, your honest answering. Yeah. But, you know, over the last 4 years, there's been a growing sentiment, starting in 2020 with the George Floyd protests, touching back on the police thing. There's a growing movement for abolition and police abolition. Do you see any kind of future for Baldwin Park where maybe we abolish the police and have more funding for other departments and other programs?
No, I think a lot of the times in theory we come up with these theories, but it just that's just not the way society works. And so, we have to have these services for every extent. And I understand that sometimes people feel that the police may, they have a certain sentiment about police, but police also play an important role in a lot of other situations that we sometimes don't think about. And like domestic violence, I used to work in a domestic violence shelter, so I remember, they play a critical role in those situations. And other situations like very violent crime, right? And it's I understand these theories, and I 100% agree with the idea that if we provide people with more resources and services, we are going to we can better their situation, not just in the short term, but in the long term. That's full on public health. That's full on public health ideology, right? That if you provide the people the services they need, and you build them a healthy foundation, especially as they're developing, they're going to have the better opportunities and better possibilities, right? But it doesn't have to be this idea where we're taking things from other places, right? And I think it just kind of talks to the idea back to, I think it just goes back to the idea of like cities are poor, right? And this is only a discussion in working class communities, right? So we have to push for better development, better ways to create money. We have to advocate not just for local government, but also higher government, state government, to propose more funds for these types of services, right? And getting people the mentorships or the ability to just have access to services that kids that are a little bit better off than them have, right?
Right. With the big thing about abolishing the police is there's a sentiment that, police don't actually solve crime, or they don't contribute a substantial amount towards keeping people safe, right? And you touching on things like domestic violence, there's a large population nationally of perpetrators of domestic violence within police departments, and that are being protected by police departments. So all this to say, there's a lot of corruption in police departments and nationally, right? So, you talk about bringing your concerns to Baldwin Park PD, and nobody gets a free ride. Is there stuff that you can? Are there things that you can do from your position to hold accountability, or like things that you push for, and if so, what are they?
So you have to remember, city council does not have the ability to get involved in daily operations, especially when it comes to staff, right? You cannot get involved in the day-to-day activities or any sort of reprimand or anything about staff. So you, as electeds, we want to make sure that we're hiring the right people. So whether it's our city manager, our chief, or any of our other directors, we want to make sure that we're hiring people that understand the importance of ethics and transparency in their work, especially as a public agency. But also setting up policies that are that are not or very detailed policies that are that pave the way for a positive work culture for everybody.
Right. Okay. Yeah. All right. I just wanted to make sure I touched on these things before. I was like, I can't have a public official and not like...
I can't have a public official and not put him on the hot seat. Yeah. Okay.
That's what it is.
All right.
You signed up for it, big dog.
Hey, big dog is like my thing. All right.
No, I mean, honestly, I do appreciate you coming down and like answering our questions and like shedding a little bit of light of like how it really is to be involved in local politics and local government and like the stuff that you've been doing during your tenure. I want to ask, like you've name dropped a couple of your programs, the tiny home programs, and you're very big on helping with the housing crisis. Are there any other programs, or even big or small, like any other initiatives that you've taken during your time in office that you're proud of?
I mean, I've literally, and it goes back to that same thing, right? Like if I'm not doing the work, then what's the point of me being here, right? And always not getting complacent or comfortable, right? Not thinking that I'm going to get reelected, or even if I am, right, I want to make sure that this term I have something to say for it, right? And I'm not kind of, oh, I did this, and like, yeah, dude, you did that 4 years ago. What are you doing today?
Right.
Right. And so, yeah, I mean, I've pushed for a lot of things. We've brought in a lot of like mentorship programs. We've really fostered a better relationship with the school district, which is important because we've talked about how different agencies are kind of codependent. We've done the affordable home ownership program. We've done the tiny homes program. We're converting the hotels into permanent supportive housing for people that were formerly or at risk of homelessness. So we want to make that. So to me, I think the things I'm most proud of is that I've kind of stuck to my guns on a lot of things that I've talked about. I want to say that I've stuck to them on everything, but also that I've taken care of the most vulnerable the most vulnerable portion of the population of the community, and that I've stuck to it, and that I've advocated for them, right? And I do that because I always tell everybody, right? I grew up working class, so kind of my, those are my wins. It doesn't have to be a nice shiny building, or it doesn't have to be, something with my name on it. It's really just the lives that we've impacted in a positive way.
Hell yeah. All right, now the real hard question. Where's the best burrito in Baldwin Park?
People get mad when I talk about food, and it's crazy. But the best burrito in Baldwin Park, well, I always say Stars has the best pastrami. I love pastrami. I do go to Main Burgers for their breakfast burrito with bacon.
Okay.
So, if you wake up in the morning, try that out. Who else? Where else do I eat? I eat a lot of places. What's Vaca? I've been going to Vaca lately, which is actually...
I don't even know if I know where that is.
It's brand new. It's on the corner of Main, on the main plaza. They have some good food. I like their chilaquiles. It's funny because I tell people, like, when I was little, I hated chilaquiles. Like, if I went to the kitchen and I was like, dude, what is this?
Yeah, it's fucking
now
boring.
Now that I'm older, I like them. But only with meat, no egg. I don't like eggs. So.
Damn, you're just eating sauced up chips?
No, with meat.
Oh, okay. Nachos? Breakfast nachos?
Yeah.
Have you, in recent years, been to Garduno's?
I was just there. Garduno's opened up their... they have a little library there.
That's what I was
really?
going to say. They have one. I forget what it's called. It's like one of those open one. There's two. You can go inside and read, but there's also those lock boxes where a kid could take a book.
Yeah, lending library.
Lending library. I could never remember the name.
Hell yeah.
I saw that. We did a recent Grubhub, me and Ricky, to Garduno's, and that was like one of the first things we noticed was they started doing a lending library.
Yeah. So they just opened those up, I think, a couple of months ago. I was there for kind of like the little inauguration. But that's really cool that Garduno's kind of took that initiative and increased the access to books.
Yeah, they've been doing a lot of cool stuff. I mean, they were like one of the first major made the shift to having a vegan menu, and like they've been ahead of the curve.
They're good at it.
Yeah.
Their vegan menu is amazing.
Yeah. Shout out Garduno's. Is there anything? This will be the last question from me towards you. Is there what are you looking forward to? Are there plans to like continue like run for another term?
Yeah, so elections are going to start. Actually, filing for this new election starts on Monday, so I'll be filing for that. I'll be filing for another term. I'm running out of time because we do have term limits, but I think the goal is to just keep going and getting stuff done and being involved. I mean, it's really, really, really important that we stay involved and advocate for things and talk about the things that matter, but also with an educative stance so that residents understand, right? And kind of feel like a parent sometimes, like, I'm not going to be here forever, but
Right.
but also because it's true, right? I do want residents to understand how government works, whether I'm in office or not, right? And change that. It's local government. It really is the hub of change. That's, like I said, right? That's everything affecting you is happening at the local level. And so we really have to pay attention to how things happen, and especially now, we're seeing it. A lot of people are are struggling. Families are struggling. Kids are struggling. And they all come from our zip code, and they all, a lot of them are working class, and they come from immigrant families. So we want to make sure that they are, that we're providing them with better resources, and also the parents. Where parents struggle to be here. We cannot let that struggle be in vain.
Hell yeah. Thanks so much, Emmanuel, for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us and answering all of our questions. I will say for my part, like being somebody that went to school in Baldwin Park, owned a house there, and like saw a lot of the struggle happen in real time, and then having you come in and like, if nothing else, not to say that you haven't done a lot, but if nothing else, just the involvement and the care that you show in your position and in trying to actually improve our hometown speaks volumes. So I will say that and commend you on that. And I do appreciate you coming out here and talking to us.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for most of your questions. No, but yeah, I mean, it's been a very unique experience that I'm super grateful for, and I always remind myself that it's not forever. So I gotta, just be humble about it. But I do want to see more people run, right? And regardless of age, or we want to see more younger people run. We want to see more people get involved in the political system, and really see like that they can make that change that they want to see, right? And that's kind of that's hopefully what people take away from. At least one of the things that they take away from my tenure, that they can be there too.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Do you have anything, Ryan? Any last questions for our guests or for the audience?
No, I had some, but they were more like contextual. Like the reason I was bringing up the daycare was I was going to ask, do you think on the current path of development the city's under, that eventually there would be room to revisit programs or revitalize old programs? Because I've, I still have friends that live in Baldwin Park, and I still visit this city, when I can. And I've noticed that they're still running, but they are, they definitely don't look like how they did when I went there.
Yeah, I mean, the city's always here to help out any and all organizations, right? And like I said, partnerships are important for us, but also making sure that our constituents and our stakeholders, that they are getting the services they need, or that we can direct them to wherever services are possible. So yeah, if any organization in the city needs help or they have questions, we want to know about it. And that's another thing why we need people to be involved. A lot of times, we're not aware of it. We might not know something. It doesn't. As an elected, it doesn't mean that I'm driving mile for mile throughout the city and.
Right.
But if I do see something, I'll mention it, right? But sometimes we're not aware of something, but once we become aware of it, then we can address it, or we can provide any assistance that we have available.
Right. If you made it this far, first of all, thank you for that. That was awesome. What's the top local spot in your hometown? Let us know in the comments. And from all of us at Un Poquito, don't fly.